Chapter 2500. The Colorless Sea. Chapter 2500. The Colorless Sea. The two of them were very far apart, but Saint Junshan's divine consciousness had locked onto Yi Futian. However, when he attempted to press down with the might of the way, Yi Futian disappeared instantly. It was far too fast. Buddha's celerity was free to move around in an instant. Although Saint Junshan's cultivation was higher than Yi Futian's, he could not detain Yi Futian with the might of the way. Can't lock onto him. Saint Junshan traveled at a speed fast to the extreme. But every time he shortened the distance between them, Yi Futian would disappear so that he could not put a lock on him. He was also a cultivator of Buddhism. Even though Yi Futian had cultivated Buddha's celerity, why was he so powerful? His speed was unable to close the distance between them. The two of them entangled in a mad chase. But no cultivators in Six Desires Heavens had discovered that two powerful figures were constantly moving. Yi Futian looked indifferent at the moment, merely taking one step at a time in the void, completely unpredictable. Even though he was discovered by Saint Junshan, he didn't seem to panic. After surviving the divine tribulation last time, everyone in Six Desires Heaven thought he died under the divine tribulation and that his soul and spirit had been scattered into nothingness. In fact, the terrifying divine tribulation did cause terrible trauma to him, almost costing him his life. When he was pierced through by the tribulation, he disappeared using Buddha's celerity and ended up in a barren land in Six Desires Heaven. He passed out for a long time before gradually recovered. That time was indeed very critical. He did not expect that the final blow of the divine tribulation would be so horrific, or he would not have so quickly taken on the divine tribulation as he did. If he did not have a superpower like Buddha's celerity, he would not have gotten away. It would be a total disaster if he were impacted by the divine tribulation and passed out where he was. Many times he had been through the tribulation, he still underestimated the horror of it. However, after the baptism of the divine tribulation, he had now completed his transformation. Because of this, Yi Futian did not leave Six Desires Heaven. He would have already left if he wanted to go, and Saint Junshan would not see him. The light of Buddha that emitted from Saint Junshan, who was chasing Yi Futian, was frightening. With a turning of his thought, the divine might of the Great Path descended and blasted on the location where Yi Futian was, but Yi Futian had already disappeared. Saint Junshan had no way of knowing where Yi Futian would appear in the next moment. He had tried many times to attack, but they were all useless. Buddha's celerity gave no reaction time, moving instantly in real time. But Saint Junshan's attack needed time to set up. Although it only took a moment for the might of way to descend, that short moment was still no comparison to the speed of Buddha's celerity. Needless to say, this enraged Saint Junshan greatly, but there was not much he could do except continue the chase. The two passed through cities and crossed mountain ranges and layers upon layers of heavens, from Six Desires Heaven to Yema Heaven and then on to Liberty Heaven. But Saint Junshan was unable to catch him. However, he did not give up, still watching Yi Futian intently. It was as if he had vowed not to give up until he had killed Yi Futian. Even if that meant chasing him outside of the Western world of Buddhism, he would persist. Yi Futian was amazed that a figure at the level of Saint Junshan could be so ruthless when he wanted to. Anyone else would have lost the patience long ago and gave up, but he was still hot on his trail. But Yi Futian didn't mind the continued pursuit and kept moving forward. After having survived the divine tribulation, Yi Futian had no idea what realm he was in right now. He had clearly just broken through into the 9th realm of Renhuang, but he had also survived the divine tribulation. So, was he now in the 9th realm of Renhuang or a cultivator who had survived divine tribulation of the Great Path? Strictly speaking and on account of realm, he had just broken through the 9th realm, so he should belong in the 9th realm of Renhuang. But because he had experienced divine tribulation at this realm, his combat effectiveness would exceed that of the Renhuang in the 9th realm. Although he had just broken through the 9th realm not long ago, Yi Futian was confident that he was invincible in the realm of Renhuang. He was confident that he could defeat top genius talents in all the worlds, even someone like Grandmaster Bitter Zen. After all, he survived the divine tribulation at the 9th realm. Unless he encountered someone as strange as himself. But perhaps the world did not have another person like this? Of course, it may be that he hadn't seen everything that there was to see. At present, it seemed that he had never heard of something like that. The two continued to travel through the void without any intention of stopping. Yi Futian's silver hair was flying in the wind, as carefree as the clouds and the breeze. They passed through a sea of clouds and entered another world. This caused Saint Jinshan to show a look of concern. Yi Futian continued fleeing and had reached the colorless heaven. "How much longer can you run?" A voice came through the air and landed in Yi Futian's ears. An ordinary voice could not possibly reach Yi Futian, as the speed they were moving at was faster than the speed of sound. But Saint Jinshan used his divine consciousness to carry the voice and directly transmit it into Yi Futian's ears. "Saint Jinshan, you were severely wounded by me years ago, and now you can't even catch up. You can't do a thing to me. In a few years, how do you think it will all end?" Yi Futian responded, which only made Saint Jinshan look even colder. He said, "Do you think you can escape?" His realm was far higher than that of Yi Futian. Even though Yi Futian relied on Buddha's celerity to maintain the same speed as him, he would inevitably encounter some accidents after a prolonged period of chasing. He didn't think Yi Futian's ability to deal with unforeseeable accidents would be better than him. If Yi Futian made a small mistake, he would die so horribly with no place to bury his carcass. This time, he would not allow Yi Futian to escape. The two of them flickered their way through the colorless heaven. In this world, few people traveled. It seemed as if there were very few cultivators here. The colorless heaven possessed a special status in the Western world of Buddhism. It was one of the several highest heavens. The Western heaven was the place where the Buddha cultivated and was considered a holy land. The colorless heaven was the cultivation heaven used by great Buddhas whenever they were proving the way. Those Buddhist cultivators whose cultivation was not on par couldn't get to the colorless heaven. Therefore, there were not many people who cultivated in the colorless heaven. But this was in no way hindering the two major cultivators who were engaged in hot pursuit. Yi Futian was moving in front, while Saint Jinshan was chasing from behind. He dared not relax even just a little. As soon as his divine consciousness drifted off of Yi Futian, there might be a chance that he would be thrown off by Yi Futian. This chase seemed to have no end. Saint Jinshan frowned at this moment. Colorless heaven held a slightly special position in the world of Buddhism. Here, there was some hermit type of great Buddhas. If they were disturbed and interfered with, it would potentially be a little troublesome. He did not expect Yi Futian to flee to this place. At this time, both of them appeared above a boundless coast region. Above this coastal region, there was a sacred light of Buddha. As this light sprinkled all over the surface of the sea, this coastal region appeared incredibly unusual. Saint Jinshan could clearly perceive the mysterious aura that existed in this coastal region, which was very ancient. The expression on his face changed slightly as if he knew where he was. Yi Futian had actually taken him to the sacred place of Buddhism, the colorless sea. "It's your funeral." Saint Jinshan looked into the distance. In the far distance, Yi Futian was also in this colorless sea. He didn't seem to have realized just where he was. Was Yi Futian really unaware of the place? While he was at Spirit Mountain, he spent many days in the library, reading and studying Buddhist scriptures and ancient volumes to understanding everything about Buddhism. How could he not know what place was the colorless sea? Chapter 2501. The Legend. Chapter 2501. The Legend. In the ancient Buddhist text, there was an account of a major event that occurred in the Western world of Buddhism 5,000 years ago. Once, there was a talented genius in the Western world of Buddhism who sought the Buddha with all his heart and soul. His piety and his extraordinary understanding of Buddhist doctrines helped sped up his cultivation. He became a respected great Buddha at a young age, only a step away from the Buddha himself. He gave up his physical body to cultivate in the colorless realm, and his spirit wandered around all the worlds of Buddhism in observation of all living beings. However, he became mired in the trappings of demonic thoughts and was unable to extricate himself from them. He believed that all beings were ignorant and selfish, and everything they did was to profit themselves. Even the Buddhists around him were seeking laurels of merits under the guise of compassion. When he was confronted with the nature of men, his faith disintegrated and eventually collapsed. He lost all hopes in human nature, and he began to doubt even the Buddhist doctrines he believed in once. Perhaps it was because he was too gifted and too young, which led to his ultimate demise. Over time, his heart turned to destruction, and his thoughts turned to evil doings. As a result, he annihilated countless living creatures. When all the Buddhist cultivators came to stop him, he did not quit but started a killing spree. For a time, the world of Buddhism was ravaged by a storm of blood and gore. Finally, all the Buddhas descended and fought him in the colorless sea. In that battle, the Buddhist sect dispatched 108 great Buddhas in total to take him down, an awesome group to represent the power of Buddhism. None of these 108 great Buddhas ever left the colorless sea. They merged their will into the colorless sea and were only then able to seal that peerless talent underneath the colorless sea. To this day, 5,000 years later, the powerful will of these great Buddhas remained within this colorless sea. Those in the world of Buddhism claimed that these Buddhas had not died but were merely continuing their cultivation in the colorless sea. There was such a legend attached to the colorless sea, as it held a special place in all of the colorless realm. How could Yi Futian not know about the colorless sea after his extensive studies of the scriptures? As he stepped into the depths of the colorless sea, he felt inexplicable coercion came from the colorless sea, that even the Buddha's celerity was somewhat impeded. He found that he couldn't go wherever he wanted to as before. But he was not the only one who felt the restriction. Even someone as powerful as Saint Junshan felt his divine consciousness had been suppressed, and his speed also slowed down involuntarily. However, he was still locked firmly onto Yi Futian, refusing to let him go. He would not stop until Yi Futian was killed. At this time, Yi Futian halted and did not proceed to move further forward. His body was floating in the sky above the colorless sea. After seeing that Yi Futian had stopped, Saint Junshan felt it was a little odd. Nonetheless, after a moment, he had also arrived and appeared above Yi Futian. He lowered his head and looked at Yi Futian, who was below. A flash of cold, murderous intent shone briefly in his eyes as he said, "It seems that you know you can't escape in the colorless sea." Even the superpower Yi Futian cultivated, like the Buddha's celerity, was greatly restricted in the regions surrounding the colorless sea, unable to move as he wished. Of course, I know. Why else would I come to the colorless sea? Yi Futian looked at Saint Junshan and replied. His words made Saint Junshan frown as he stared at Yi Futian. "You know about the colorless sea?" "Junshan, I have been cultivating Buddhism for more than 10 years, reading and studying the ancient texts of Buddhist scriptures in the library. What do you think I was doing there?" Yi Futian said coldly. "Since you knew, why do you come here to seek death, then?" Saint Junshan asked without emotions. "Back in Six Desires Heaven, you were just as overconfident and overbearing as you are now. You wanted to capture me by force, but do you remember what happened?" Yi Futian said sarcastically. "If I wanted to leave the Western world of Buddhism, do you think you would have an opportunity to catch a sight of me in Six Desires Heaven?" "So, you did all this on purpose?" Saint Junshan finally understood what Yi Futian was driving at. He deliberately appeared in Six Desires Heaven to lure him to the colorless sea? What was the purpose for Yi Futian to do so? With his level of cultivation, Yi Futian dared to lure him to the colorless sea for what? Saint Junshan couldn't wrap his head around this logic, nor the reason Yi Futian could have for taking him to the colorless sea. Yi Futian waved his arm at this moment, and suddenly a guqin appeared in front of him. It was yearning, left to him by Shen'in the Great. With his outstretched hand, Yi Futian started plucking the strings, and the sound of guqin was heard. Suddenly, infinite musical notes jumped around, and just at that moment, waves appeared on the previously tranquil colorless sea. Rhythm! Saint Junshan had a curious look on his face. This guqin appeared to be an exceptional item, possibly a divine item. But even so, Yi Futian thought that with the help of a guqin and playing the rhythm, it would be sufficient to contend with him? What an idiotic notion! The light of Buddha obscured the sky and the sun, shrouded the boundless space. Ancient Buddhas now appeared above the firmament, and a massive Buddha sat in the sky right on top of the colorless sea. Just like before in Six Desires Heaven, he raised his gigantic hand and grabbed towards Yi Futian. The space was sealed close, oppressing the space where Yi Futian was. In the past, Yi Futian blew up the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor to escape, and it had severely wounded him. Was he going to use a guqin to fight him now? The gigantic palm print moved extremely fast, and it came down instantly. A massive loud bang was heard as the surface of the colorless sea roiled. However, it missed Yi Futian. Yi Futian flickered away with Buddha's celerity and disappeared under the palm that slammed down in that brief moment. Even the power that had sealed the space could not block this Buddhist superpower. Yi Futian's figure appeared in another place in the colorless sea, floating on the surface of the sea. Saint Jinshan looked at him with some curiosity. "So, you are already in the 9th realm." Saint Jinshan stared at Yi Futian and marveled that he could forcibly teleport himself using Buddha's celerity. Jinshan cultivated in Buddhism and had some understanding of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Buddha's celerity was very powerful, but it was by no means invincible. If they were to compete by pure brute force, he ought to be able to suppress Buddha's celerity completely. But how did Yi Futian manage to escape the range of his attack with Buddha's celerity? It should not have been possible even in the 9th realm. More importantly, the colorless sea was an unusual location, which ought to have suppressed their true strength, no matter how slightly. Buddha's celerity should have been affected as well. The sound of guqin continued playing as the notes jumped around and moved in the sky above the colorless sea. Saint Jinshan frowned and wondered as to what kind of guqin music this was. It was able to affect his will and caused some fluctuations. With the beating movements of the notes, they fell directly into the colorless sea, and suddenly, there was a violent movement in the sea, as a powerful and mighty will began to emerge from it. "What are you doing?" Saint Jinshan stared at Yi Futian with an extremely cold and apathetic expression. Yi Futian was trying to communicate with the will of the ancient Buddhas in the colorless sea using the sound of guqin. How could Saint Jinshan not know that there were 108 great Buddhas inside the colorless sea? To suppress that incomparable fiend back then, these Buddhas integrated their collective will into the colorless sea and sealed the fiend here. Yi Futian was now attempting to communicate the will of the great Buddhas in the sea using the sound of guqin. Was he trying to use the power of these great Buddhas to fight against him? This madman. He was trying to use the colorless sea. So, was this the reason why he lured him here? However, even if Yi Futian could leverage the will of the great Buddhas in the colorless sea, was that enough to contend with him? What an idiotic notion. However, he was a little worried. If Yi Futian was to fight him by leveraging the will of the great Buddhas in the colorless sea, what would happen if he destroyed the will of these ancient Buddhas? Would the great men of colorless heaven blame him for such destruction? Chapter 2502, Killing Jinshan. Chapter 2502, Killing Jinshan. The colorless sea roiled, and Saint Jinshan seemed to be considering something. In the rioting colorless sea, an unparalleled light of Buddha bloomed. Buddhas began emerging from the sea, accompanied by a deafening clattering sound. Once those Buddhas surged out of the sea, they expanded and became even greater, forming a spectacular sight. The entire colorless sea turned gold in color, and the light of Buddha was ablaze. It appeared extremely sacred. In the vast surrounding area, the phantom of Buddhas shrouded this coastal region. In every position was an ancient Buddha. The will of the great Buddha. Saint Jinshan frowned slightly, and his gaze swept coldly at Yi Futian below, who continued playing the guqin. Did Yi Futian really think that he could communicate with the will of the Buddhas in the colorless sea with his music and fight against someone like him? This idea was way too naive. He was going to show Yi Futian that the gap between realms was an irreparable chasm that could not be offset so simply by the will of the great Buddhas. A horrific aura bloomed from Saint Jinshan. His palm raised, and a giant Buddha phantom suddenly appeared behind him, raising his golden palm along with Jinshan and slapped it down at the space beneath. A massive and boundless symbol of one appeared, covering the sky and the sun, shrouding this corner of the world, directly oppressing Yi Futian with absolutely domineering force. Although it was just a random blow, it was enough to kill Yi Futian, at least in Saint Jinshan's eyes. Yi Futian could not possibly withstand his blow. The infinite and brilliant light of Buddha emerged from Yi Futian. In the roiling colorless sea, the endless light of Buddha poured into Yi Futian's body so that he was completely submerged in it. The will of all the Buddhas seemed to resonate with him as their shadows faintly appeared behind him. The aura on him was also becoming extremely terrifying. The heaven and the earth roared, and the colorless sea was violently tossing and turning. A gigantic and boundless ancient Buddha appeared, and it was the Mahavarakana. This Mahavarakana raised his hand without warning and slammed it with unspeakable power towards the symbol of one in the void, and the two collided. Boom! A terrifying sound was heard, and the palm of Mahavarakana was destroyed and shattered. However, at the same time, the huge and boundless Buddhist symbol of one was broken into pieces as well. This symbol of one was transformed by the attack from Saint Junchan, but it was broken apart by the palm of Mahavarakana. Saint Junchan had an alarmed look in his eyes. It was as if he was very surprised by the sight in front of him. He lowered his head and looked at the colorless sea below, focused solely on Yi Futian. Yi Futian had disarmed his attack by using the palm of Mahavarakana. Although it was only a simple blow, it was from him, Junchan after all. Saint Junchan was the cream of the crop existence in the Buddhist sect, who had survived the second divine tribulation of the Great Path. Even someone as strong as Lord Six Desires, Lord Liberty, and Lord Yema had to take orders from him. Those were also existences who had survived the second divine tribulation of the Great Path, but there was still a considerable gap between them and Junchan. Although his status was far beneath top giants such as Tongchan, he belonged to the group of people at the top of the pyramid in the Western world of Buddhism, both in status and strength. Even an unexpected blow from him contained destructive power that could not be imagined. Even those who had survived the first divine tribulation of the Great Path would find it difficult to face his attack, never mind a cultivator in the 8th realm or just broken through the 9th realm. Even if someone were able to resist it, it was bound to be at a great expense and may cause them grave injuries. However, Yi Futian was able to block his attack directly. This violated all the rules of cultivation. How could this be possible? Even with the help of the colorless sea, it was equally impossible. The gap was simply too great. How did Yi Futian make up for the difference? There was only one possibility. Yi Futian's combat effectiveness was more substantial than he was aware of. This aura. Saint Junchan perceived the tyrannical aura released by Yi Futian. At this moment, Yi Futian no longer bothered to disguise it and released his own aura to the fullest. The aura that erupted from him was not at all like the aura from someone who had just entered into the 9th realm. Upon Yi Futian, Saint Junchan even felt a slight trace of the aura from someone who had survived the divine tribulation. This meant that Yi Futian's true strength was probably far more than someone who had just entered Renhuang of the 9th realm. Did you conceal the strength of your cultivation before? Saint Junchan stared at Yi Futian and asked him. This whole situation was out of order. I went to Spirit Mountain, where all the Buddhas were present. Even the Buddha himself made an appearance. You think I was hiding my cultivation? Yi Futian looked at Saint Junchan with a sarcastic expression. Did Junchan just suggest that he was hiding before the Lord of all Buddhas and the other Buddha lords? How preposterous. So, you have indeed just recently broken through to the 9th realm, but why do I sense the aura of someone who had survived the divine tribulation? Saint Junchan stared at Yi Futian because he was truly curious. Could it be that there were still some other secret treasures on Yi Futian? Yi Futian didn't mind dragging this out for a while longer. He stared back at Saint Junchan and replied, You weren't wrong. What did that mean? Saint Junchan's eyes sharpened. What did Yi Futian mean by that? He wasn't wrong? This was the aura of someone who survived divine tribulation. Tribulation. Saint Junchan remembered previous rumors that had occurred in Six Desires Heaven and other places, that a mysterious cultivator experiencing the divine tribulation all over the place had completed the divine tribulation in the domain of path obliteration. Was Yi Futian the person who experienced divine tribulation? It was you surviving the divine tribulation in Six Desires Heaven? Saint Junchan stared at Yi Futian in disbelief. A 9th realm Renhuang experiencing divine tribulation? And was this the reason why Yi Futian's momentum was so powerful? Your perception sucks. Yi Futian said sarcastically. He didn't mind telling Saint Jinshan the truth. Today, only one of them would leave alive. There was a terrible rumbling sound that was heard, and the colorless sea was still roiling. Under the sound of Guqin, the light of Buddha in the colorless sea poured into Yi Futian's body. He closed his eyes. His entire body was radiant, bathed in the light of Buddha, and holier than anything else. Seal! A word came out of Yi Futian's mouth, and suddenly the infinite light of Buddha gathered in the vast domain, turning into a gigantic Buddha. It enveloped this entire coastal region. It was now turning into an absolute domain space and sealed it shut. Within this domain, everything must be isolated, including the will of the way and divine consciousness. Even if Saint Jinshan knew the truth, it was impossible for him to spread that news around. This space is an independent and insulated world of its own. The sound of Buddha lingered and resounded through the void. Around the coastal region, all the Buddhas surrounded the sky above. Yi Futian stood on the sea with his hands clasped in front of him and his eyes closed tightly. It was as if he was the master of this sea at this moment. Today, he would use the colorless sea to kill Jinshan. Chapter 2503. Go back into reincarnation. Chapter 2503. Go back into reincarnation. Saint Jinshan glanced at the surrounding heaven and earth. He detected a peculiar aura inside this absolute sealed space. This was the domain created by Yi Futian, and it had actually blocked out all other kinds of powers. At the same time, in this vast domain, every one of the Buddhas was suspended in the air, and the golden light of Buddha was set ablaze. All these great Buddhas were chanting the sound of Buddha, which lingered between heaven and earth. They resonated with the Guqin played by Yi Futian, turning it into the Vajra spell. Yi Futian stood on the surface of the sea, and a Buddha phantom appeared to surround him. By leveraging the will of all the Buddhas in the colorless sea, Yi Futian was able to turn himself into a Buddha, as if he had already proclaimed the way. His aura was comparable to that of Jinshan's. Only at this moment did Saint Jinshan realize just what kind of a monster he was facing. This was a genius talent from Divine Prefecture who had experienced the divine tribulation in the ninth realm, and now leveraging the will of all the Buddhas in the colorless sea. In fact, Yi Futian was well known in the Divine Prefecture even before this, and Jinshan had known quite a lot about him. This was why he had gone to intercept Yi Futian. Still, he seemed to have underestimated this genius talent and the terrifying extent of his ability. Saint Jinshan could never have imagined that this cultivator, who came to the Western world of Buddhism as a Renhuang in the eighth realm, continued to be a thorn at his side even without the divine body. Saint Jinshan no longer intended to underestimate his enemy and was sobering up to prepare for the coming battle. He could sense the imminent threat that was permeating from Yi Futian. The light of Buddha lit up all over the colorless sea, and a terrible aura was released from Saint Jinshan. His eyes were terrifying, and a sacred halo appeared behind him. The light of Buddha that came from the massive ancient Buddha could set the world on fire and blind the eyes of the beholders. It was the Mahavairakana. Mahavairakana was an extraordinary battle form of Buddhism. However, as Saint Jinshan was also a cultivator of Buddhism with profound cultivation, he was an expert in all of the Buddhist methods, including Mahavairakana. More importantly, when someone's cultivation was at the level of Saint Jinshan, his Mahavairakana battle form contained defining self-characteristics. The light of Buddha emitted from it contained terrible destructive power as if it could expiate all the others. Rumble. The palm of Mahavairakana pressed down, and heaven and earth roared as the colorless sea continued to roil. Frantic waves now raged over the once calming surface of the sea. At the same time, the heavens were lit up by the flaming light of Buddha. By borrowing the will of the ancient Buddhas, Yi Futian was protected by the golden frame, which also gave way to the Mahavairakana battle form. His version of the Mahavairakana battle form was immensely virile, containing the incomparable divine light of the sun, which shot out lights of destruction. In the void, all the Buddhas condensed the seals at the same time, which they blasted toward the Mahavairakana from Saint Jinshan. These two massive handprints intersected and collided above the colorless sea. The flaming light of Buddha was so fervent that it was simply blinding. That wave of searing air current could dry up the sea, but this sea was no ordinary body of water either. This was the colorless sea. Even so, the sea was still roaring and howling as the two attacks collided in the void. Both attacks dissipated as soon as they made contact, but none of them had the upper hand. This blow made Saint Junshan realize that after Yi Futian leveraged the will of the Buddhas in the colorless sea, his combat effectiveness was no less than his own. The will of the Buddhas in the colorless sea was different from ordinary willpowers. This will was more real in a sense. At that time, the Buddhas had merged their collective will into the colorless sea to suppress that demonic fiend, so it was conceivable that this will had to be immensely powerful. Furthermore, it was a will that was imbued with spirit. Now, it was reawakened by Yi Futian's sound of Guqin, and he, alone, controlled these resurrected Buddhas. Yi Futian, you are disrespectful to Buddhism, and the Buddha will definitely release you. Saint Junshan looked down at Yi Futian and declared in an icy voice. Those words resounded throughout the 9 heavens, attempting to influence Yi Futian's will. I use the hands of all the Buddhas here to clean the house of Buddhism, and the Buddha will not guilt me for that. Yi Futian responded, once, the Buddhas suppressed the demonic fiend in this place. Saint Junshan, even though you are a student of Buddhism, you are bewitched by the evils in your heart. The colorless sea is where you will be buried. You speak without shame. Saint Junshan looked down at Yi Futian and said, show me just how strong you can be by borrowing the will of the ancient Buddhas. As his voice faded, the sound of Buddha came from his mouth. This sound resonated throughout the void, like a Buddhist mantra or spell, making the colorless sea tremble. Even the will of all the Buddhas on Yi Futian was affected and seemed to peel away from Yi Futian. Yi Futian frowned. Saint Junshan seemed to be communicating with the will of the Buddhas using Buddhist spells so that they would not be under Yi Futian's control and would return to the colorless sea. This would, no doubt, directly weaken Yi Futian's strength so that it would be impossible for Yi Futian to contend against him with his own realm alone. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced at Junshan. He was indeed an existence who had survived the second divine tribulation of the Great Path. However, Yi Futian had been spending all these years inside the library of the Buddhist sect, and he had not wasted his time there. He had cultivated at Spirit Mountain for more than 10 years and had comprehended the Buddhist scriptures even before he was able to break through the boundary of the realm. After the efforts of all these years, his methods of Buddhism were no longer what they were when he first arrived in Spirit Mountain. How could a few months of cultivation compare to the cultivation of more than a decade? At this moment, Yi Futian uttered the sound of Buddha and put down the Guqin. His hands clasped together, and an infinitely solemn Buddhist aura suddenly emitted from him. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. The sound of Buddha lingered in the sky, and the colorless sea seemed to be suppressed and was becoming extremely quiet and calm. At the same time, the will of all the Buddhas had been integrated into him and was now stabilized once more. Faces of ancient Buddhas seemed to appear faintly with solemn expressions. Solemn and holy, it was as if they had really been manifested into reality. 6 syllables of truth. Saint Junshan felt that his spell had been suppressed in the void, and he had a terrible look on his face. The heaven and the earth resonated, and the will of all the Buddhas were one. Above the firmament, the true form of Buddhism was revealed, and all of them were bona fide ancient Buddhas. Yi Futian had actually comprehended the 6 syllables of truth. No wonder he dared to come to the colorless sea like this. Buddhist cultivators who were able to comprehend the 6 syllables of truth were all people with superb Buddhist methods. They possessed deep roots in Buddhism and had predestination with the Buddha. Since ancient times, only those who were truly at the great Buddha level could comprehend and accomplish such cultivation. Yi Futian understood the 6 syllables of truth. In this colorless sea, all the Buddhas would think that he was the one true Buddha who had obtained the true teachings of Buddhism, while Junshan would stand on the opposite side of them. As soon as the 6 syllables of truth were spoken out loud, veritable Buddhas suddenly revealed themselves in the heavens, and each one of them was like the ancient Buddha in the colorless sea who had been revived. They incarnated as a real Buddha sitting in the void, surrounding Junshan. At the same time, the one gigantic ancient Buddha began to solidify his presence into being, completely covering this corner of the sky, majestic and boundless. Yi Futian's body was growing larger as well, turning into a Buddha. All this in front of him made Jinshan trembling in his heart. This was the reality battle form. Yi Futian had acquired another battle form in his arsenal. Yi Futian had transformed into a Buddha. It was as if he, a cultivator of the divine prefecture, was the true heir of Buddhism. He had cultivated supreme Buddha methods, and he intended to use them to release Jinshan in the here and now. Jinshan, return into reincarnation. A voice spoke. It seemed like the sound of Buddha was lingering between heaven and earth. It was like an unshakable truth of the great path asking Jinshan to go back into reincarnation. Chapter 2504, Killing Jinshan. Chapter 2504, Killing Jinshan. The 6 syllables of truth was the supreme mantra of Buddhism. Although it possessed no direct power to attack, it could bless, thus augmenting all kinds of Buddhist methods. The mantra itself represented the greatest wisdom of Buddhism and was considered the most orthodox of all Buddhist powers. When the 6 syllables of truth appeared, the colorless sea seemed to have produced some kind of resonance with Yi Futian. It was as if all the willpower of Buddhism within the colorless sea could be used by him. What was more terrifying was that the Buddhas appeared like great Buddhas in their physical forms, releasing tremendously aggressive Buddhist methods. At this moment, Saint Jinshan was alone and on his own, as if he was a public enemy of Buddhism. There was a terrible look on his face now. In all this, he was the cultivators of Buddhism and should be one of their own, while Yi Futian was the true outsider, a visitor from the divine prefecture. Now, these Buddhas were fighting alongside Yi Futian. With their blessings on him, the Buddhist methods released from Yi Futian seemed to bent on suppressing him. Yi Futian had even arrogantly declared to send him back into the cycle of reincarnation. It was as if his words were the absolute truth, the principle of the great path. It would send him, Jinshan, into the wheels of reincarnation. The sound of Buddha lingered as heaven and earth resonated. The sound of Buddha came from all the Buddhas all at once and resounded throughout the colorless sea. The terrible Vajra spell went for Saint Jinshan, piercing through the shadows of Buddhas that had gathered around Saint Jinshan. They even blasted towards Saint Jinshan himself with the intention to kill. At this moment, what really terrified Saint Jinshan was that Yi Futian might really have what it takes to send him back into reincarnation. Boom! Saint Jinshan had a solemn expression on his face, and he seemed to be in a grave mood. He clasped his hands together in front of him, and his eyes closed tight. Above his body, the golden light of Buddha radiated as he transformed into a real Buddha. Behind him, shadows of Buddhas appeared as solidly as if they were real entities. Subsequently, these shadowy Buddhas stretched out their arms, more and more, until they covered up the entire sky and blocked out the sun. At Saint Jinshan's brow chakra, a divine eye seemed to have opened up. It held a mark of Buddhism, which was extremely shocking to behold. That mark turned into something like a sword, carrying with it an unparalleled sharp aura, like that of a peerless warrior. In an instant, all the hands that were released by the Buddhas behind Saint Jinshan were holding a divine sword. These divine swords released an unparalleled sharpness that seemed to slaughter all evil demons in this world. The swords had not yet been unleashed before that terrifying sword will came for the kill. Everything in its path was extinguished and silenced. Yi Futian also felt the oppressive power of this technique. This ought to be a potent attack that Saint Jinshan had derived from the Buddhist superpowers. This divine sword was even more terrifying than the sword of catastrophe from the divine tribulation of the Great Path, comparable to the sword of law, which was capable of shattering all the power of the Great Path. Yi Futian knew that Saint Jinshan felt his life was being threatened, so he had unleashed his most powerful last resort to end him here in the colorless sea. In this battle, one of them had to be buried in this place of Buddhist legend. Mahavairakana. The Buddha body transformed by Yi Futian released an unparalleled light of Buddha as the Vajra spell swept out. At the same time, all the Buddhas blasted out their supreme handprints, the palm of Mahavairakana. Kill! Saint Jinshan uttered. Although he was a Buddhist, at this moment, His murderous intent had shot through the sky. This attack technique was just like his own character, domineering and sharp. This technique was created by him, the eponymous Zhenchan sword. The moment the Zhenchan sword was released, those many arms moved at the same time as well. The divine swords in their hands slashed out. They collided with the Vajra spell but were unable to shake it in the slightest. Those arms continued to extend out with the divine swords in their hands, covering all the space, missing no corners, and slaughtered everything in sight. The palms of Mahavarakkana collided with the Zhenchan swords as an apocalyptic light erupted above the colorless sea. The palms of Mahavarakkana were broken up and destroyed, but the Zhenchan swords were constantly breaking apart as well, one after another. However, those arms seemed infinite and endless, continued to slaughter at those Buddhas with Zhenchan swords in hand. Even if these were Buddhas who were resurrected, if they were here to help Yi Futian, Saint Zhenchan would slay all of them. What if they were the ancient Buddhas? He, Saint Zhenchan, was a great Buddha of the present day, and he was not afraid of the will of some ancient Buddhas from the past. Those terrifying attacks collided, and the arms holding the Zhenchan swords stabbed at the shadows of Buddhas, extinguishing them one by one. The destructive power was far too horrific. It seemed as if a strike by the Zhenchan sword was enough to cause immediate destruction. No matter what power of the great path it was transformed from, they were annihilated equally. People who have cultivated to the same level as Saint Zhenchan had their own understanding of the way, and Zhenchan's sword was an example of such comprehension. Having perceived the terrifying attacks from Saint Zhenchan, Yi Futian did not waver in the slightest. O Imani Padme Hum. O Imani Padme Hum. The 6 syllables of truth remained as the sound of Buddha lingered in the sky above the colorless sea. The heavens resonated, as the seal that covered this coastal region personified into shadows of Buddha, like a mural cast from these Buddhas. This was no longer just the 108 Buddhas but hundreds and thousands of great Buddhas. All of the Buddhas resonated as if listening to the truth preached by the Buddha. Seeing those countless arms continue to extend outward to slay, all the Buddhas also stretched out their arms at the same time. All Buddhas returned to the source. Saint Zhenchan raised his head to look into the sky. Under the light of the great sun, all Buddhas returning to the source. At this moment, Saint Zhenchan truly felt a sense of desperation. How was Yi Futian able to achieve this phenomenon after only having been in the Spirit Mountain for a little over a decade? Even after he had cultivated for this many years, he was unable to achieve a vision such as all Buddhas returning to the source. However, Yi Futian did it by leveraging the will of the Buddhas in the colorless sea. This blow spared nothing, and everything was destroyed in its wake. There was a horrific sound of rumbling. When this blow fell, those many arms shattered, and even the Zhenchan swords could not resist it, as its force directly submerged this space. This blow was not the power from Yi Futian, but the power of all the Buddhas. Yi Futian was just the person who set it all into motion. He had urged the phenomenon of all Buddhas returning to the source with the 6 syllables of truth, and as all the Buddhas came down with their joint attack, it was not something that Saint Zhenchan could have resisted. Boom! The attack annihilated everything. It blasted on the colorless sea. The colorless sea tossed and turned violently as if the sea itself had been punched through. The tumbling colorless sea roared and howled and only gradually calmed down after a few moments. A few rays of Saraira light flew out from the colorless sea, trying to escape. Yi Futian's eyes were cold and indifferent. His finger pointed at those Saraira beads, and suddenly they shattered, one after another. A phantom of Saint Zhenchan seemed to appear now, his face distorted, angry, as well as a tinge of reluctance and desperation. Zhenchan, a great Buddha of the world of Buddhism, had fallen into the hands of a youngster from the divine prefecture. It was a lamentable ending. Go, Yi Futian said, and the phantom of Saint Zhenchan disappeared, his soul and spirit dissipated into nothingness. At the same time, the aura from his body gradually lessened as the will of the Buddhas returned to the colorless sea. There was a pervading sense of weakness. But Yi Futian heaved a sigh of relief. In this battle, Zhenchan was killed. Now, there was one less worry for him, as there was one less powerful enemy. Chapter 2505. The Return. Chapter 2505. The Return. The colorless sea returned to its previous state of tranquility. Meanwhile, Futian closed his eyes and rested. However, he suddenly sensed a very powerful negative emotion. It was as if there was an invasion of another will, which did not leave his body. What's going on? Futian wondered. In his perception he saw a Buddha. This Buddha was solemn and sacred, dazzling with divine light. But it was invading him little by little, intending on occupying his entire consciousness. This was not right. Futian perceived something unusual and realized this was no time for rest, after all. The light of Buddha on his body was radiant as he recited the sound of Buddha until he was covered in nothing but the light of Buddha, which attempted to purify all evil spirits. Is that his will? Futian's heart trembled slightly. He remembered the legend of the colorless sea. He fought in the colorless sea and killed Saint Junshan by the collective will of all the Buddhas in the colorless sea, but this collective will was here for a reason, to suppress that powerful demon who was once a great Buddha. Just as he was borrowing the collective will of the Buddhas in the colorless sea, the will of that demon stole its way in as well. In his consciousness, the invading Buddha phantom turned dark. It was a pitch-black Buddha whose lotus seat had taken root in his consciousness. At this time, Futian was becoming extremely irritable and negative. He remembered many horrible things from the past, like the time when he first entered the Western world of Buddhism, when he was chased by the great elder Futian, when he was hunted by Lord Six Desires, or when he was kept prisoner by Lord Initial Zen and the others. There was also the hostility from Saint Junshan, Shinyen Arhat, Shinyen Buddha Lord, and so many other similar instances. These memories had all flooded his mind at this point in time. There were even voices in his head saying, "Man is evil by nature, and all Buddhas are sanctimonious." Futian's expression changed slightly as he proceeded to take out the divine guqin, yearning, once again and played with both hands. At the same time, his lips were constantly moving, and the sixth syllable of truth reverberated throughout this space. Suddenly, all the Buddhas resonated with him again, and the colorless sea was in turmoil once more. The sea rolled back, flowing upstream against logic, and shrouded Futian's body. The will of the Buddha once again resonated with the will of Futian. Under the 6 syllables of truth, the sound of Buddha was simply deafening and worked to keep him in a state of alertness. His body was transformed into the body of a Buddha, and at the same time, he visualized an ancient golden Buddha in his mind's eye, sitting on a golden lotus, facing the dark Buddha, trying to suppress the other. This demon was drawn by him and should be dispelled by him as well. Once before, the will of all the Buddhas had been integrated into the colorless sea to suppress this demon, and it should be possible to do the same again today. In the sea of consciousness, the 2 great Buddhas were at an impasse. The only difference was that the dark Buddha was only one, but across from him, the golden ancient Buddha was surrounded by many other Buddhas. The sound of Buddha was coming out of them at the same time. This world had been transformed into a world of the Buddhas, suppressing all evil demons. Futian's body trembled slightly. Even though he had stabilized his body and soul with the Buddhist methods, it was difficult to achieve absolute peace. The 2 wills were fighting and struggling, and he felt a splitting headache, which was more taxing on him than when he was dealing with Saint Junshan before. Moreover, that invading demon was extremely terrifying and stubborn. He was once a great Buddha who was proficient in Buddhist doctrines. Later, he gave up hope in all things, which paved the way for him to become obsessed with the demonic realm. For this reason, the effect of Buddhism on him was limited. He had never been truly and completely vanquished in all these years. Futian even mobilized the imperial will, as his whole body was now as bright as a divine body, while the 2 wills struggled. He seemed to have suppressed the opponent somewhat but was unable to destroy it. At this time, the clouds and mist above the sky parted, as the light of Buddha was shining down, falling on the surface of the colorless sea, shrouded Futian's body at the same time. Over yonder, a beam of light descended, and at the end of that light of Buddha, a great Buddha with a golden frame could be seen. He looked down at Futian. The Buddha Lord of colorless heaven. Yi Futian secretly exclaimed in his heart. There were several very powerful great Buddhas in the colorless heaven, and this should be someone at the level of the Buddha lords. The light of Buddha shone on Yi Futian as if there was a thought that directly entered into Yi Futian's consciousness, helping him to fight against that Buddha of the darkness. The light of Buddha on these Buddhas became more fervent. Gradually, cracks appeared on that dark shadow of a Buddha. However, his eyes remained indifferent and cold as he watched all this. Then, everything shattered and was destroyed, dissipating into nothingness. It's done, Yi Futian thought to himself, as the collective will of the Buddhas left him and dissipated once again. As the light of the Buddha on his body retracted, he looked up into the firmament, bowed, and said, "Thank you, Buddha Lord." That Buddha Lord put his hands together and replied, "Amitabha, benefactor, Yi has a deep connection with Buddhism. If you continue to cultivate in Buddhism, you will be a great Buddha one day. Buddha Lord speaks too highly of me. Buddhism is profound, and I have only just scratched the surface. This time I have disturbed you in colorless sea and almost caused serious trouble. I beg your forgiveness." Yi Futian bowed again and apologized. "Benefactor, Yi had no choice in the matter," the great Buddha responded. "Thank you, Buddha Lord, for your understanding. I apologize for disturbing Buddha Lord's cultivation. I will take my leave now," Yi Futian said. That Buddha Lord put his hands together as Yi Futian bowed to take his leave. Then, his figure flickered as he departed, and the light of Buddha that was above the firmament also dissipated. The Buddha Lord himself disappeared as well. Yi Futian drove hard on the journey using Buddha's celerity. It didn't take long before he came to a place, and he stopped to close his eyes to cultivate. At the same time, he notified Hua Jiyu and the others that their trouble was no more. A few days later, Yi Futian, having recuperated, continued to push on his journey with Buddha's celerity, moving out of the Western world of Buddhism. Everything in the world of Buddhism had now come to an end, so he should be leaving now. At the same time, many great Buddhas of the Western world of Buddhism had received news of Saint Jinshan's demise. For a time, their hearts were disturbed. However, some great Buddhas seemed to have already foreseen this very ending, and they remained as peaceful as ever. Grandmaster Bitter Zen learned of the news while he was sweeping outside the library. He merely raised his head to look into the distance before continuing the task of cleaning up the fallen leaves. In comparison, the likes of Shinyan Buddha Lord and the others were more shocked by the news. Yi Futian had managed to hunt down and kill Saint Jinshan at the colorless sea. He had done so by leveraging the collective will of all the Buddhas inside the colorless sea. Saint Jinshan was no more. With the death of Saint Jinshan, Jinshan Temple was now just something that was part of the past. In the endless void, a golden-winged rock was moving forward through the emptiness, with turbulence raging in the space it was traveling through. On the back of the golden-winged rock, Hua Jiyu looked behind her with her beautiful eyes. It seemed as if she was looking for something. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of her and landed on the back of the golden-winged rock. Without the slightest fluctuation of aura, it appeared simply out of thin air. It was Yi Futian. The golden-winged rock was controlled by him. It was natural for him to pinpoint its location and meet up with Hua Jiyu and the others. "That's amazing," Chinny remarked when he saw Yi Futian appear without warning in front of them. In his experience, no matter what kind of great path power was used to travel through the void, there were always some signs which could be perceived ahead of time. However, Yi Futian's appearance was without the slightest fluctuation in aura. It was as if he had truly appeared out of nowhere. Buddha's celerity is one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. It is indeed amazing, Yi Futian responded with a smile. "Master!" Fang Xiuan and the others came forward and called him happily. They were very happy when they saw Yi Futian's safe return, especially comparing this to when he was being chased by Saint Jinshan. "Everything is fine now," Yi Futian smiled and said. He then looked at Hua Jiyu. "I've come back." Hua Jiyu nodded. "Let's go home." Yi Futian smiled, and the group of them nodded in agreement. Time to leave and get back to the Z-Way segmentum. At that moment, everyone stopped cultivating and quietly waited. Not long after, a group of people arrived. They did not enter the starry cultivation court from the passageway in Ziwei Imperial Palace, instead directly appearing here. Yi Futian controlled the will of Great Emperor Ziwei, so he naturally could do so. In the starry sky, a golden-winged giant peng bird dove down with its wings outstretched. Its wings blocked out the sun as it circled around in the starry sky. It then stabilized itself and floated in midair. On the back of the golden-winged giant peng bird, a few figures stepped forward. The person who stood in the center had white robes purer than snow. He looked down at the familiar faces below and smiled. His expression was gentle, and there was not a shred of aura emanating from his figure. He seemed like an ordinary person, yet he gave off an extraordinary vibe. Everyone knew that Yi Futian had improved greatly on his journey. Futian. Palace Lord. Younger brother. Master. Many voices called out at the same time. Many titles were mentioned, but they all referred to the same person. They were all calling out to Yi Futian. Yi Futian had been away for more than a decade. It was such a long time. Now, he had finally returned. "I am back," said Yi Futian as he smiled at the familiar faces approaching him. "Boss, how about you leave this golden feather to be educated by Condor-sama?" Black-winged Condor asked Yi Futian. He had not taken his eyes off the golden-winged giant peng bird, Mo Yunzi. This golden-feathered bird was a great threat to his own position. Now that Master had returned, he had to seize the initiative and assert his dominance. Golden feather? Mo Yunzi's sharp eyes shot over towards Black-winged Condor like daggers. Was he Condor-sama? This was the first time Mo Yunzi had heard someone refer to him with such an uncouth name. He was the divine bird, the golden-winged giant peng bird. Even in the world of Buddhism, he had standing and was the mount of Buddhas. This black bird dared to call him such a name? What are you looking at? I, Condor-sama, have followed Master for many years. How can you be compared to me? Shouldn't you be showing your respect to yours truly? Black-winged Condor said in an arrogant tone. Buzz. Mo Yunzi could not tolerate this any longer. He immediately charged over with his golden claws outstretched. His dignity was still intact even though he was now the mount of Yi Futian. He would not allow Black-winged Condor to walk all over him. Insubordination, chided Black-winged Condor as he dodged. The two demonic beasts took to the skies at extremely high speeds. The crowd watched this scene in surprise. Yi Futian had just returned, and these two demonic beasts had actually begun fighting. Yi Futian was also stunned. He then revealed a smile. Although these two fellows were fighting now, they were connected to him and knew where to draw the line. Was your journey successful this time? Lord Taishin asked. Lord Taishin greeted Yi Futian politely first. He then looked to the others and said, "It has been years since we last met. I have missed you all. Seniors, pardon me for not greeting you all individually." The crowd nodded in understanding. It wasn't that Yi Futian did not wish to follow protocol, there were just too many people. If Yi Futian were to greet them all one by one, he would waste a lot of time. Cultivators did not bother with such formalities anyway. Our journey this time was very successful, replied Yi Futian as he looked at Lord Taishin. He continued, I brought Qingqing to Western Heaven, and we went to Spirit Mountain. Qingqing was the reincarnation of the Buddhist lamp of the Buddha. She had accompanied the Buddha during his cultivation in her past life. She has now recovered her memories as ancient Buddha Qingding. Yi Futian continued. Chen Yi went to Great Bright Domain and also obtained his inheritance. As for me, I had many fateful encounters in Western Heaven and cultivated many miraculous Buddhist doctrines. I had the opportunity to come in contact with several high-tier Buddhist doctrines on this trip. I have reaped many benefits from them. Yi Futian summarized the experiences their group had over the past few years for the crowd. However, everyone knew that there was more to what he was telling them. This journey had certainly not been easy. Nevertheless, it seemed as though the benefits of this trip were indeed huge. The cultivation of these young fellows has also improved by a lot. It was well worth the trip, Emperor Shi said as he looked at Fang Xiuan and the others behind Yi Futian. Old Ma and the other cultivators from Four Corner Village also came forward. They revealed smiles as they looked at Little Ling and the others. Yi Futian smiled as he looked at the crowd and said, "First elder brother, second elder sister, third elder brother, Do Zhao Mu, all of you have improved greatly. These past few years, we have always been hard at work cultivating in the Z-Way segmentum. Since we were forced to seal ourselves away in the world of Z-Way, aside from cultivating, there was nothing else we could do. The starry cultivation court also contains the will of the great emperor, so all of us have indeed improved greatly," Lord Taishin said with a smile. "It is just that we do not know what has happened in the outside world and how the heavenly mandate realm is currently." Lord Taishin seemed to still long for the heavenly mandate realm. Responded Yi Futian as he nodded his head. "After so many years, I also wish to know how it is in the outside world currently. Now that I have returned, we can remove the seal on the Z-Way segmentum and head out to take a look." Qi Xiangang looked at the chessboard, and his eyes revealed a smile as he said, "It seems that you have benefited greatly from this trip to the Western world of Buddhism." "How could you tell?" asked Yi Futian. Qi Xiangang smiled as he explained, "The chessboard reflects this. Although you still have a sharpness like before, you have become steadier. You advance and retreat in an orderly fashion. Your disposition is different." He seemed to have witnessed Yi Futian's growth. Now, the fate of the Z-Way segmentum was tied to Yi Futian. He might also still be related to the fate of the original realm. Qi Xiangang naturally knew that Yi Futian was extraordinary. He was a figure who could rewrite the history of the cultivation world. They were all witnesses to this history. "I comprehended Buddhist scriptures on Spirit Mountain in Western Heaven for many years and had some enlightenment. It might be that I have changed slightly," Yi Futian replied with a smile. Qi Xiangang advised, "I heard that Buddhist doctrine is broad and profound. It is a shame that I never had the chance to come in contact with it. It is really fortunate for you to have had such an opportunity. Now, the world is in chaos, and this chaos is not just restricted to one realm. The various worlds are all facing it. You should befriend those who can be befriended. At the same time, continue to strengthen yourself and the powers you govern. Otherwise, alone, it will be difficult for you to handle everything." "I understand," replied Yi Futian as he nodded his head and took this to heart. More than a decade ago, ever since he returned to the original realm from the Divine Prefecture, the world had been thrown into chaos. In the past, he had even been in the midst of this storm. Now, more than a decade later, he had cut off contact with the outside world and had only made a trip to the world of Buddhism. However, the chaos of the outside world had not changed even after he left. The conflict had continued endlessly. When they looked back at this period of time in the future, it might be that it was merely a small portion of the chaos to ensue. At that moment, a fiery red silhouette dashed in from the outside. It was a divine phoenix that landed in the courtyard. It was Zifeng. After they met each other on Eastern Deity Island, she had always been following Yi Futian. Now, aside from the various demon clans that followed Yi Futian, he also had a few demonic beasts that followed him personally, such as Little Condor, Zifeng, and Mo Yunzi. When Yi Futian saw Zifeng appear, he suddenly felt emotional. Now, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Renhuang Plain, and he had even survived a divine tribulation of the Great Path. From the looks of it, he needed to pick back up the alchemy techniques that he had inherited from Supreme Deity Donglai on Eastern Deity Island. If he concocted pills now, he would certainly be able to concoct the most powerful imperial-level elixir. It was just like his teacher Qi Xiangang had said, it was not enough for him to improve alone. In this chaotic world, with the Z-Way segmentum as his base, if he wanted to vie for power over the original realm, he needed to raise the power levels of the members in the entire Z-Way segmentum. In order to do so, alchemy would play a critical role. However, to concoct the highest level pills, they needed the prescriptions as well as extremely precious medicinal materials. All of these needed to be gathered. Although the memories of Supreme Deity Donglai contained many precious prescriptions, for Yi Futian at his current cultivation level, they were no longer powerful enough. "Mr. Qi," greeted Zifeng as she bowed towards Qi Xiangang. Although her cultivation was far superior to Qi Xuangang's, she still was exceptionally polite to him. After all, he was Yi Futian's teacher. Yi Futian's teachers did not have high cultivation. However, in the Ziwei segmentum, they all held high positions. No one dared not to respect them. This was naturally due to Yi Futian's ability and influence. Of course, this was also because he was very respectful to his teachers. If he did not show them respect, others would naturally follow suit. Qi Xiangang nodded as he returned the gesture. Zifeng, what news do you have of the outside world? Asked Yi Futian. From the news we have received from the outside, the various worlds have opened passageways to the original realm, Zifeng reported. These past few years, cultivators from the various worlds have been pouring into the original realm, causing the number of cultivators there to grow exponentially. The various worlds also have many strongholds. Currently, the original realm has become a gathering place for the cultivators of the various worlds. Besides that, many relics have emerged. There are even ancient ruined realms floating in the void, and some of them have Emperor's relics. All of them have been explored. In many places, cities and even whole continents have been established. That means to say that there have been many more realms appearing in the original realm over the years? Asked Yi Futian. In the past, the original realm had 9 supreme regions and was called the 3,000 realms of the Great Path. However, with the changes to the original realm, many unknown lands had emerged and were gradually being explored, becoming new realms. Replied Zifeng as she nodded her head. It is not just that. The top forces of the various worlds have directly established realms in order to develop strongholds and allow more cultivators from their worlds into the original realm. They are all frenziedly developing their own powers. From the looks of it, the original realm is once again becoming the center region of the various worlds, lamented Qi Xiangang. Yi Futian nodded and said, countless years ago, legend has it that the original realm was once the only world. After the collapse of the heavenly path and countless eons of changes, our current situation was established. However, it seems that the original realm contains infinite mysteries. These mysteries have surfaced over the years. Hence, the various worlds have all gathered in the original realm and have constantly competed. It is indeed akin to the center of the universe. This chaotic world is both a catastrophe and a fateful encounter. This will certainly be a grand era, added Qi Xiangang. The Devil Emperor ended the chaos in the Devil World, whereas Donghuang the Great and Emperor Yi Qing ended the chaos in the Divine Prefecture. Now that the chaos in the original realm has spread across the various worlds, who will be the one to determine the rise and fall of each world? Yi Futian nodded his head. At that moment, he frowned slightly. He heard something. What is it? Qi Xiangang asked when he saw Yi Futian's expression change. There are some things that I need to settle. Teacher, I will head back first, Yi Futian said as he got up. Go ahead, replied Qi Xiangang as he nodded his head. Now, Yi Futian was the ruler of the Ziwei segmentum. He needed to oversee everything around here. Qi Xiangang naturally understood this. Yi Futian's figure immediately disappeared without any fluctuations of aura as he sat there. When Qi Xiangang and Yen Yuan witnessed this scene, they were stunned. From the looks of it, after returning this time, Yi Futian was even stronger than they had imagined. However, no one knew the exact extent of his powers yet. Yi Futian directly appeared in one of the squares of Ziwei Imperial Palace. Quite a number of people were here. A few of them were injured. These cultivators were one of few groups who left the Ziwei segmentum. They were mostly cultivators from the original realm, including Xiao Dingtian and Xiao Muyu from the Xiao clan, Do Zhao, and the clan lord of the Do tribe. All of them were actually injured. What happened? Asked Yi Futian. We were ambushed, responded Xiao Dingtian. B****, cursed Do Zhao, who had a short temper. They were cultivators from the Donghua domain chief's manor. The leader was Ninghua. He knew that we emerged from the Ziwei segmentum. He actually planned to kill us all, not giving us any chance of survival. Ninghua. A cold look flashed in Yi Futian's eyes. So it was Ninghua, the vice chief of the Donghua domain chief's manor. Back when Yi Futian was in the Donghua domain, Ninghua hunted him relentlessly. Zongchan, the disciple of the Millet Emperor, had been killed by him too. Yi Futian had always kept this vendetta at heart. Now, Ninghua actually attacked his alliance again after knowing that they left the Ziwei segmentum. Xiao Dingtian continued, Ninghua is a 9th-tier Renhuang now. His Great Path is flawless, and he is proficient in the Grand Seal Great Path. He is strong. It was difficult for us to withstand his attack even with our combined powers. For now, I will kill Ninghua and spare Ningyuan, Yi Futian said. Ningyuan was the domain chief of the Donghua domain chief's manor. If Yi Futian killed him, the Donghuang Imperial Palace of the Divine Prefecture might take his action as a threat to their authority. Their situation would become murky then. Currently, Yi Futian's forces in the Ziwei segmentum were still not strong enough. They needed to be patient. Hence, Yi Futian only planned to kill Ninghua this time and let Ningyuan have a taste of the agony of losing his own son. The Millet Emperor placed high importance on Zhongchan, and Zhongchan was supposed to be his successor. Yet, Zhongchan was killed by Ninghua. Most likely, Ningyuan had never experienced the pain suffered by the Millet Emperor before. Yi Futian would spare Ningyuan? The Millet Emperor was stunned. He cast a surprised look at Yi Futian. His question was meant to find out how Yi Futian planned to escape unscathed from Ningyuan. However, Yi Futian said that he would spare Ningyuan for now. This caused the Millet Emperor to feel somewhat bizarre. Did Yi Futian think that their group already possessed the strength to kill Ningyuan, the domain chief of the Donghua domain chief's manor? How much did Yi Futian improve exactly during his trip to Western Heaven recently? Which level was Yi Futian's cultivation at now? To the side, Li Changsheng, Emperor Shi, Yang Wuqi, and the others also glanced at Yi Futian. His statement of sparing Ningyuan caused their imaginations to run wild. The current Void Realm had even more realms than it had before. Many relics hidden in the void space were discovered and developed into cities. The Donghua realm was one of them. This place was conquered by the Donghua domain and became the base for their forces in the original realm. Just as Xiao Dingtian had said, it was more appropriate to consider the Donghua realm as a city. The outskirts of the realm were still barren. The only city was the one in the center of the realm. Development took place in the areas around the city, slowly expanding outwards. This place might evolve into a true realm in a few years, with cultivators inhabiting every inch of land. Of course, the city which was located at the center was already very busy and lively now. After all, top forces from the Donghua domain and other places gathered and established powerful troops here. Moreover, a lot of top cultivators from various worlds were also here since many fateful encounters were awaiting them in the current original realm. An ancient aura permeated this continent where a relic stood. However, the city was newly built. In the sky above, a golden-winged giant prung bird glided past, heading towards the center of the city. Its wings were outstretched, shielding the sun. Many cultivators down below raised their heads to look at the bird. They were slightly shocked. Such a powerful divine bird, someone exclaimed. It's a 9th-tier demon emperor, someone pointed out. With a dash, many Renowangs took to the sky. A 9th-tier demon emperor had come. Moreover, it was carrying quite a few cultivators with it. Something big was about to happen. Let's go and take a look. One by one, the local cultivators dashed and tailed the golden-winged giant prung bird from a distance away. They wanted to see what would happen. For the cultivators to be able to use a 9th-tier demon emperor as a mount, what level would they be at? They might have come to the Donghua realm bearing ill intentions. The Donghua Palace was the branch set up by the Donghua domain chief's manor in the original realm. Vice Chief Ninghua was cultivating in the palace. He had returned from his adventure not long ago. After discovering that the cultivators from the Ziwei segmentum had come out to the outside world again, he taught them a lesson. He would have killed some of them if a few experienced cultivators from the other party had not joined forces to push him back. As for Yi Futian, he was now the common enemy of all forces of the Divine Prefecture. A while ago, there was news of him visiting the Great Bright Domain and then the world of Buddhism. Ninghua's father, Ningyuan, heard some rumors from the Imperial Palace, claiming that Yi Futian was hunted by other cultivators when he was in the world of Buddhism. The divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor had been destroyed. Apparently, Yi Futian went to explore Western Heaven after that. There were no detailed updates of his trip there. After all, Western Heaven had no connections with the Divine Prefecture. They could only learn bits and pieces of information regarding Yi Futian through the Imperial Palace. Yi Futian had indeed gone to a very far place. Now that so many years had passed, he would most likely be back, right? Otherwise, it would be unwise for the cultivators to emerge from the Z-Way segmentum and be active in the outside world again. However, since Yi Futian had lost the divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor and had become the common enemy of the Divine Prefecture, Ninghua was curious to see how long it would take before Yi Futian could muster his courage to leave the Z-Way segmentum himself. As for Ninghua, since many other cultivators revealed their talents during the chaos of the original realm back then, he was no longer a bright cultivator people looked highly upon in the original realm now. Taking Yi Futian as an example, he was almost invincible among the Renhuangs. This caused Ninghua to feel very stressed. Therefore, he had been training hard to improve himself. Currently, Ninghua's cultivation was at the peak of the Renhuang Plain. He believed that in a few years, he would have the opportunity to undergo the divine tribulation. At that moment, a powerful pressure descended outside the Donghua Palace. This caused Ninghua to frown. At the same time, in the Donghua Palace, cultivators took to the skies one after another. They looked up into the sky and saw a divine golden-winged giant peng bird floating in midair. Its gaze was as sharp as daggers. On the back of the divine golden-winged giant peng bird, a very familiar group of figures stood. The leader was dressed in white robes and had white hair. Everyone in the Donghua Palace knew who he was. During the Donghua banquet, Yi Futian had astounded everyone in the Donghua domain. After so many years, Yi Futian actually dared to emerge from the Z-Way segmentum. Yi Futian gazed down below from the back of the golden-winged giant peng bird and shouted, "Ninghua!" His voice reverberated throughout the space and shook the Donghua Palace. This caused the hearts of countless people to tremble. Ninghua appeared. At the same time, several beams of spatial light shone in the Donghua Palace. It seemed as though teleportation grand matrices had been activated. When Yi Futian's group saw this scene, they did not do anything to stop it. It could even be said that they did not mind it at all. It was as though they had not seen it. Their gazes were fixed on the figure emerging from the Donghua Palace. It was the previous top monstrous figure and the vice-chief of the Donghua domain, Ninghua. "Yi Futian!" Ninghua called out as he looked up at the group of figures in the sky. He never thought that Yi Futian would emerge from the Z-Way segmentum and appear here. For a moment, the members of the Donghua Palace, as well as countless people in the surrounding area, all raised their heads and looked up at the gigantic divine bird in the sky. Was Yi Futian here to seek vengeance? Spatial light shone. In Donghua Palace, cultivators kept appearing. They were all cultivators from the supreme forces of the Donghua domain. Cultivators from Divine Palace of Fluttering Snow, Taihua Mountain, Nanhua Clan, Desolate God Palace, and other major forces appeared. They all looked towards Yi Futian and were somewhat surprised. It had been many years since the great emperor revealed himself, and Yi Futian sealed himself away in the Z-Way segmentum. However, for Yi Futian, this amount of time was still far from enough. For Yi Futian to emerge from the Z-Way segmentum now was undoubtedly him walking into the lion's den. Many people had a score to settle with him. Chapter 2509, Ninghua's Big Defeat. Chapter 2509, Ninghua's big defeat. In those forces that sided with the Donghua domain, many people were close to Yi Futian. For example, the sword goddess from the Divine Palace of Fluttering Snow was one of them. She even sided with Yi Futian's camp and fought with him once. However, later, it was disclosed that Yi Futian had something to do with Emperor Yi Qing. After being informed of that, the imperial palaces were irritated. Donghuang the Great even took up the matter in person. In such circumstances, the forces in the Divine Prefecture did not have any other option at all, and Yi Futian completely understood that. The Divine Palace of Fluttering Snow fixed its relationship with the domain chief's manor after the passage was opened, so they were also in the Donghua Palace at the moment. The sword goddess and her disciples, Qin Qin, Jiang Yueli, and Chu Hanxi, were all there. They all set their pretty eyes on Yi Futian. Gazing at the white-haired young man that had returned, they wondered how he had been cultivating all the past years. Taihua Skylord and Goddess Taihua from Taihua Mountain were also there. Goddess Taihua threw Yi Futian a complicated look. She had the opportunity to inherit one of the imperial stars once, which Yi Futian had offered her. However, she missed it due to her guard against him. And that was because of the relationship between the domain chief's manor and Ninghua. By then, Yi Futian had returned with such a powerful lineup. Was he going to settle things with Ninghua? Ninghua, you kept chasing me after the Donghua banquet in the Donghua domain. The domain chief's manor killed everyone from Wangshan Watchtower. So many years have passed, and you hurt the practitioners from the Ziwei segmentum again. Today you will pay with your life. Yi Futian looked down at Ninghua, filled with pride. That scene contrasted sharply with the condescending manner in which Ninghua had looked down at him when Yi Futian attended the Donghua banquet. Big shots from various top forces in the Donghua domain were all sitting in the air back then. As the vice chief of the domain chief's manor of the Donghua domain, Ninghua did not even look at Yi Futian. However, people seemed to see Yi Futian's despise for Ninghua at the moment. There was contempt in his indifferent tone. He sounded like he had never regarded Ninghua as a decent opponent. Do you intend to kill me? Ninghua showed a sarcastic smile. Looking at Yi Futian, he said, the divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor is broken. How dare you leave the Ziwei segmentum? The Great Emperor was merciful enough to let go of you, but now that you are already here, you won't be able to go back again. Several divine lights containing the formidable force of the Great Path of Space descended into the Donghua Palace as soon as he finished speaking. As those divine lights came, practitioners showed up from thin air in different directions. Yi Futian totally ignored him and sent Qin Yi to deal with him. Yi Futian was already very powerful back then. He showed tremendous combat power when he was at the 8th level. Ninghua was not sure about defeating him indeed. However, he could not believe Yi Futian had sent Qin Yi to fight. When Yi Futian defeated Qin Yi in the Donghua banquet, Ninghua was already the #1 genius in the Donghua domain. But Yi Futian despised him to such an extent? A surprising sealing force broke out. Numerous sealing runes showed up on his body. It was the God Seal spell. Instantly, that great path of space seemed to be closed. The moment Ninghua, who had achieved the peak Renhuang plane, gave that force off, the great path domain newly erected seemed to block all other forces. The divine light of the seals flew out of Ninghua's eyes toward Qin Yi, aiming at the latter's eyes while he was approaching the former. That divine light of the seals could even seal spiritual souls. The God Seal spell could seal everything in the world. Countless seal spells fell from the sky and turned into the divine lights of the great path that flew to Qin Yi, intending to seal all of his forces. However, at the same moment, two formidable lights also came from Qin Yi's eyes. Those were the real light. The method of light crashed into the divine light of the seals and blocked the invasion of the sealing force. In the meantime, his body was shining and turned into the body of light that looked like a divine body. His body floating in the air seemed to be the source of light. The lights from him were bright enough to blind people's eyes and purify everything in the world. Meeting the divine lights of the seals in the air, they surprisingly turned those runes into nothing. Is he so strong? Those powerful cultivators were looking at the two's battlefield from far away. That divine light was dazzling. Many Renhuangs standing in the distance felt their sights were blocked, although they were not the ones being attacked. They could hardly open their eyes in that light. The powerful cultivators from the Donghua domain were even more nervous. Qin Yi was also from the Donghua domain. It was from there that he left for the Donghua banquet with Yi Futian. And by then, Qin Yi turned out to be so dreadful. He was on the peak Renhuang plane. In the fight against Ninghua, his path of light suppressed Ninghua's God Seal spell. Even the practitioners around Yi Futian were shocked by the fact that Qin Yi was already strong enough to defeat Ninghua, let alone others. As Qin Yi approached Ninghua floating, numerous beams of light shot at the latter. Ninghua turned pale. His body seemed to transform into the sealing body of the Great Path. When lights shone on him, they were immediately sealed. At the same time, A dreadful divine light of the seals flew from him, carrying an aura above his level. A rune showed up behind him. It was the seal spell.